So it has to be accurate so that when you read the book and you casually read a page and read about what Mr. Casey is eating, you will get a very correct idea about the diet and food of the Mauryans. So everything that you read, you will get a very accurate idea of that period, and that is the reason why I write historical fiction. So what is historical fiction? It's not fictional history. It's called historical fiction for a reason. Most of it is historically accurate. What you just need is a few characters on which to hang the story. So Mr. Casey is a character with literary antecedents. Like I said, there are many antecedents. I could not tell you more. There are many other literary antecedents, but she is a fictional character. Acharya Chanakya is not a fictional character. Chandragupta Maurya is not a fictional character. There are many characters in the book who are real, and there are some who are fictional. A person who is well versed in the history of that time will be able to recognize the real people. It's wonderful also to get a chance to talk about the Urnabhi series. It has been a labor of love. I will tell you something about my own journey to writing this book, the way this book was published, the way it then moved forward into a series, and it's all kind of very, it's a story full of serendipity. So I was a bureaucrat in the Indian Revenue Service, 1992 batch. I worked for 16, 17 years, and then my husband decided to join the United Nations in Geneva. I had always wanted to write, so I took 2 years off to be with my family and also to write. The result of those 2 years was a book. It was not as if I had known nothing about the Mauryans before writing the book. I did, because history and ancient India has always been my passion. And I have learned Sanskrit so that I can read primary sources, etc. Now the book was written, but how to publish it? And all of us know, everyone knows that publishing a book for an outsider who has absolutely, no connections in the publishing world is not an easy task. So I used to write very frequently on a Facebook page called the Rare Book Society of India. And in that Rare Book Society of India, the gentleman who ran the page and who became a very good friend, Subhaya Yadalam, he was somebody who was we used to talk to each other. So he asked me, you write such wonderful little snippets on history, why don't you write a book? So I said, I've written a book and I'm looking for publishers. So he was the one who got in touch with Rolly Books. He sent excerpts from my book to Priya then read it and got in touch with me, and the rest is the Urnabhi series. So till the book was published, Priya, Neelam, and I, they are the ones who work with the book, had never met. Subhaya and I have never met. So you see, these are the wonders of the modern internet age. All this happened on a virtual medium. So it was not easy to write a book on ancient India, a popular book on ancient India, because all of you will know from your own reading that ancient India is very, very underrepresented. Historical fiction is not a very popular genre. Mythological fiction and Puranic fiction, Mahabharata or Ramayana fiction is very popular. But historical fiction is not very popular. There are very few people who write it. And in English, it's like almost negligible. So when I wrote this book, and the English is interspersed with a lot of Sanskrit. So my publishers, well, they obviously had issues and they asked me, are you writing a Sanskrit book or an English one? It has to be an English one, so don't use so much Sanskrit. So, we went through 13 rounds of editing for the first book. And it was quite harrowing because there were some things I was not willing to let go of. There are some words which are untranslatable. So the first book came out after a lot of hard work on the part of the publisher and me, and we were thrilled with the response. I had not expected that a kind of complex and dense book would be so popular. I had always wanted it to be a series. So then, as soon as the first book was published, I started writing the second one, and more time, more research, more interaction, more in-depth knowledge. I make that web series also, Moraloke, which I have spoken about on Sangam Talks before. So my knowledge is increasing as far as the Mauryans are concerned. And so I think the depth of the story is also increasing, because I feel now that, almost as if I live in Patliputra. And that is what I want you to feel also. So this was book one, The Story of a Modern Dancing Girl. This was book one. It came out in 2014. This one just out on April 25th. This is Chanakya Scribe. This is book two. The first thing about the name Urnabhi. What does Urnabhi mean? Well, actually, honestly, it doesn't mean anything, because it comes from the Sanskrit word Urnanabhi. And that word means a spider and spider's web. This is a tadbhav of that Sanskrit word. Now, why spider's web? Because this story is based on the spy network of Acharya Chanakya. It is based on the extensive spy network, which was the invisible web of protection over the entire Mauryan Empire. So I write about this Unanabhi. Where did I get this word from? So, when I was reading through the Upanishads, when I was writing the first book also, and the Upanishads, there is this concept of the spider. From the spider's stomach comes out a web, which is like this world full of Maya, and then that disappears again into the spider's stomach. So this Urnanabhi is something like that. It is created, it is an illusion, it is Maya, it is what the spies do to further the ends of empire. And then it comes back again into the spider's stomach. So you can think of the spy network as the spider's web, which appears and disappears at will. This was as far as the name was concerned. The protagonist had to be a woman. There was absolutely no doubt in my mind about that, because I don't think that I can really do justice to a story where the protagonist is only a man. So the protagonist had to be a woman, and a woman who lived on her own terms. So I chose a Ganika to be the protagonist. What is a Ganika? A Ganika is a courtesan deluxe. She is lady who is very, very well versed in all the 64 arts, in the Vedang, all the Chaturdash Vidyasthanam. She is beautiful, she is talented, she is a gem amongst women. And she is the concept of the Ganika was very closely related with the political, social, and cultural network of those times of ancient India. These were women who had their say in politics, who had their say in society, and who were looked upon with great prestige. So don't think of them as the very, today being a prostitute is not something anyone looks up to. Sex workers are not really given their due. It is not seen as something wonderful to do. So don't think of them as prostitutes, because there were many levels of Ganikas. There were also, so to speak, common prostitutes who were called the Roop Jivikas, but the Ganikas were different. Now, this Ganika had also to be someone with a lot of links between the actual history of the time as well as the literary history of the time. So, where does my protagonist come from? Where does Miss Rakesi come from? She is a spy. She becomes a spy in the pay of Chanakya. But how did I visualize this character? Where did she come from? So, at the same time, I was reading the Natya Shastra. The Natya Shastra is the treatise on dramaturgy, on Geet, Vadya, Natya, Nritya, theatre, and you must all have heard of it, written by Bharat Muni. So, at the beginning of the Natya Shastra, Lord Brahma creates two dancers who are going to give the exposition of dance theatre to the entire world. Now, these two were Sukeshi and Mr. Keshi. So, anyone who has read book one will know that Sukeshi and Mr. Keshi are two sisters. Mr. Keshi comes to Patliputra to avenge the death of her sister, Sukeshi, who was the leading courtesan, leading Ganika of Patliputra, she thinks that Acharya Chanakya has had her killed. And she decides that she is going to come to Patliputra and kill Acharya Chanakya. How does this all pan out? Of course, you have to read book one for that, but she meets him, and a lot of her thinking changes, and she actually starts working for him, starts working for the Mauryans. But Mr. Casey is also an Apsara. I'm telling you about the way the character came to me in my mind. So she is also an Apsara who is mentioned in the Abhigyan Shakuntalam. So I envisioned this very delicate, beautiful, talented dancer, but with a core of steel. Somebody who looked delicate, but who was very, very strong. And her strength is needed in the trials that come to her in her stay in Patliputra, in her work as a spy. Her handler, her spy master, is someone called Pushyamitra, who is the male protagonist. And in book one, they have a stormy relationship. And well, that relationship is resolved in some way. I can't give you spoilers for book one because I will move on to book two. Book one shows us the Mauryans who have just come to Patliputra. So Dhananand, the Nanda dynasty was the one before the Mauryan dynasty. Dhananand has been overthrown. Chandragupta has been anointed as the king. But he is not really the king in the sense that all the strings of power are not in his hands. So they're still struggling. And that struggle has to be carried on by the spies in their administration. So, how does the Mauryan Empire then extend from Magad to the north, that is up till Gandhar? How does it come to the south? How does it come to the east and west in the Indian subcontinent? What does the spy system, what role does it have to play? That was the story of book one. When we start with book two, this is the one Chanakya scribe. Mr. Casey, after all her adventures, is now the assistant of Acharya Chanakya. She is in the department of the Prashastras, that is the department of scribes, the ones who wrote the shasans and administrative orders, etc. So there was a separate department in the Mauryan administration for that. She is a scribe. She is now at the beginning of book one, married, pregnant, very dissatisfied with her life because this is not where she thought she was going to end up. She has not been trained or brought up to think of herself as a wife and a mother. So, pregnancy, marriage, family, she is not able to deal with it. And in chapter one, you see a very, very dissatisfied protagonist, very dissatisfied heroine, wondering what she should do with her life because life has somehow dumped her somewhere where she doesn't want to be. So, what is she going to do now? How is she going to pick up the threads of her life and do something with her life which she wants to do? Because for quite some time, the idea of being a mother does not appeal to her. She had never thought that she would be a mother. She's also a wife, she's also a daughter-in-law, she's also a sister-in-law. She has to deal with these family relationships on the one hand. On the other hand, she's one of the assistants of Acharya Chanakya, but she isn't getting an audience with him. She isn't getting to do any work. She has not found her place in the administration. So she's struggling professionally as well as personally. So, how will this struggle play out? The relationship between her and her husband is also a little difficult because there are a lot of other women in his life, or so she thinks. How are all these things going to work out? The background of this is the extension of the Mauryan Empire into parts beyond the Indian subcontinent, that is, into Afghanistan. The big Central Asian empire at that time was that of Seleucus. The Seleucids were the big empire which came after Alexander, the Greek king. He conquered extensive territories and then he died. And all his generals, they were called the Diadochi, they fought with each other about who would get which part. So Seleucus managed to grab quite a bit of it. And his empire, the Seleucids, were the big empire in Central Asia, then you have India, and then you have a lot of trade routes, a lot of places where their interests clash. So the conflict between the Seleucids and the Mauryans had to happen. There was no other way out to resolve this. So, how did this conflict work out? What did the Mauryans do? What did the Seleucids do? What was the politics like? How did they finally resolve the situation? This is the story of Chanakya's crime. It's very personal at one level because it is a story of a woman who's trying to sort out her life. And at the other level, it is vast, political, it is at the level of empires. And how do the personal and the political collide with each other and affect each other? That is the story of Mr. Casey's life. She has to keep many domestic turbulences under control. She has to keep many personal turbulences under control and yet keep working for the extension of the Mauryan Empire. One thing which I would actually like to say before, this is the story, and I don't want to tell you anything more because they're going to be spoilers. But I can just say that she fights very hard to make herself professionally, settle herself professionally, give herself good professional standing. On the other hand, she is being attacked physically. There's someone is trying to kill her. So she has also got to protect herself. Who is trying to kill her and why? What is the reason why somebody should want her and her unborn child dead? These are the things she has to grapple with. The story moves on along with the a picture of the Mauryan Empire as it ran day to day, the different administrative areas, the different social and cultural areas. So I have tried to give you, like I said, a 360-degree view. I want you to feel that you are sitting in Patliputra and watching all this happen all around you. There are the books, as Tanya had said, the book is based on a lot of primary sources. Well, one of the main primary sources, of course, is the Arthashastra. And then I have almost everything is structured according to the Arthashastra. So the politics is structured according to one of the elements of the Saptanga state, which I have spoken about last year at such great length, which is called Mitra, which is all the neighboring kingdoms around you. So around the Mauryan kingdom in the southern part of the country, our country, were the Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, and the Satyaputas, because they were not part of the Mauryan Empire. They were allies and friends of the Mauryans and had very close relations with them. Also in Sri Lanka, part of Sri Lanka was also very closely related to the Mauryan Empire. How did these relationships work? Then what about the rest of the Asian countries? What about the rest of the countries which were in the continent of Europe? How did the Mauryans actually operate as a global empire? That background is also there. They acted as a global empire, and the relationship between these different constituent countries, I have tried to work that out according to the theory of Mitra, which is there, which is diplomatic relations between different nations with our own nation, the king at the head of our own nation, as the Vijigishu, the conqueror who has to deal with friends, foes, enemies, everything. So I have put the world politics at that time into the framework of Mitra. And a lot of the information that is there, like I have been emphasizing and saying many times, that all this is based on primary sources. So you will perhaps not get this kind of information or this kind of background setting anywhere else, because primary sources are often not relied upon by people who write historical fiction. I know of very few, perhaps I don't know anyone who writes historical fiction in English and reads Sanskrit. I'd love to know anyone else. If there is someone like that, I'd love to know them. But I don't think so. So primary, so therefore I feel it will give you a completely fresh look at the Mauryan period, at the story of a person, at the story of a woman. She's a woman like many of us over here. How does she live her life? You know, there are no isms, there's no feminism, etc., etc. But she is a strong woman leading a or trying to lead a fulfilling life. How does that work? So you will get a lot of personal stories, you'll get a lot of political stories, you'll get a lot of background, you'll get a lot of danger, intrigue, excitement. So you will have fun reading the book, and you will also learn a lot. After you read the book, you'll be experts in the Mauryan period, believe me. I don't want to tell you any more about the story because I feel that, it'll be a spoiler. If I tell you any more, then see, because it's a story of mystery, thrill, and suspense. So I cannot tell you more than what happens in the first chapter. Otherwise, the whole point of the suspense will be lost.
So I just want to know that the way you have so beautifully and so intriguingly kind of interwoven, the whole political, social, and you research so much to get all these things very accurately, and you insert a fictional story into it to intrigue the reader. So I want to know that how do you do this? I mean, what was the motivation for you to keep it so real and then also weave in a fictional story into it?
So, Tanya, history has been my passion always. So, it was a no brainer that I would write about something that happened in the past. And then also, how would I write it? It's a melding of, information and entertainment. Now, for instance, I myself, I love the genre of mysteries and thrillers. So I myself, I'm reading a book right now, which is set in Singapore of the 1930s. And it is giving me a perspective on the Indian fight for freedom from the point of view of South Asian and Southeast Asian countries. How did it work out? What did they think? What did the Indians who were there, say in Malaysia or Singapore, what did they think? What did they do? And I find it absolutely fascinating. So, my idea has always been that when you read historical fiction, the setting should be absolutely authentic, accurate, well researched. So that, I don't say things like, anomalous things which were not there during that period and I start talking about it. So, if I start talking about Chola bronzes in the Mauryan period, that's wrong. There were no Chola bronzes in the Mauryan period. I mean, that kind of bronze sculpting was not there. So I should not write about it. Or what kind of food was eaten. I have to write about food which was eaten then. So I cannot say that they ate, burgers or noodles. They did not. They ate something else. So it has to be accurate so that when you read the book and you casually read a page and read about what Mr. Casey is eating, you will get a very correct idea about the diet and food of the Mauryans. So everything that you read, you will get a very accurate idea of that period, and that is the reason why I write historical fiction. So what is historical fiction? It's not fictional history. It's called historical fiction for a reason. Most of it is historically accurate. What you just need is a few characters on which to hang the story. So Mr. Casey is a character with literary antecedents. Like I said, there are many antecedents. I could not tell you more. There are many other literary antecedents, but she is a fictional character. Acharya Chanakya is not a fictional character. Chandragupta Maurya is not a fictional character. There are many characters in the book who are real, and there are some who are fictional. A person who is well versed in the history of that time will be able to recognize the real people. But yes, for the person who picks up this book without actually being a great expert or knowing a lot about the Mauryan period, they may be a little confused about who is real, who is not. So the people you recognize, I mean, you'll recognize Chandragupta and Chanakya, obviously. There are also some minor characters who are also from the real people who lived in that period, especially the intellectuals and the knowledgeable people and the prominent people who lived at that time. Another person in the book, another character in the book is also a real person. His name is Katyayan. He was also a real person, a grammarian, an intellectual, and a person who is mentioned many times in the history of the past. So perhaps it would be an interesting exercise for you to see how many of these people you recognize and how many of them you feel are fictional and how many of them are real. But the thing about historical fiction is that it should very easily, in a very digestible form, give you a lot of information about the past. And for someone, see, I like reading, maybe I love reading Sanskrit texts and read it the whole day, and I read all kinds of dense academic stuff. There may be people who may not want to do all that, but they still want to know. So, this is what makes such perhaps dense knowledge very easily accessible to anyone. You will enjoy reading it and you will learn about it. So, historical fiction is all about presenting reality with a little tinge of imagination, because this is not a history book. It's, it's a storybook. It's for fun, but the fun beneath the fun, the layers beneath the fun are for, it is for learning, for information. So I love this genre of historical fiction, because the Mauryans are the ones who set the template of this country. It's not as if our civilization started with the Mauryans, but they set the template of the country in the subcontinent. And there's so many things we have taken from the Mauryans: the lion capital, the rupee, so many things, the peacock. So we are the modern Mauryans. It's important for us to know our foundational empire. So for me, again, of course, born in Patliputra, born in Patna, so it was again very natural. But also because of the kind of parallels that are very clear between the Mauryans and us, which is, however, very much obscured by time, and the dust of time is such that it obscures everything.
Thank you, Sumedha ji. And I also wanted to know that the primary sources that you delved into and you go back to, how easily are they available, and what all did you do to gather those? Must have not been an easy task.
Tanya, when I started off, this was a very long time ago, 2008. 2007. That's when I started off on this journey. So of course it took 7 years for the first book to come out, and another seven for the next book to come out, but hopefully the third one will come out much quicker than that. So for this, what do I need? What are the sources of evidence? One is Sanskrit texts. The other for this were Greek texts. Then there are inscriptions which are found on pillars, on stone vases, on many things. So all Mauryan inscriptions, which are called epigraphs. Another thing was from coins, so numismatics. Another source is archaeological remains. So what you, for example, you find those Ashokan pillars, freestanding Ashokan pillars, or you find the ruins at Sarnath. All those. So how do you study those? For the archaeological remains, there are archaeological reports, and my goodness, they are not easily available. The ASI does not make it easy for you to read any of their reports. So getting them is an exercise in patience. Sanskrit texts were very, very difficult to get in 2007. As time has passed, however, the digitization of Sanskrit texts has become much better. So now they are often available on the internet. So I can get a lot of text there. I have also, I mean, I buy a lot of books, and my friends who come from India are always getting kilos and kilos of books from India for me. Getting primary sources is quite a task, and that is the main task. So I do look at internet repositories such as archive.org. Then you have JSTOR, and then you have lots of books and inscriptions, and things have become much easier. Things are improving. When I go to Delhi also, for example, I am able to access a lot of libraries. They are making their rules much easier, so you can access those libraries and go in there. But it requires a lot of patience, because something that you want to know, like right now, I am now kind of thinking very hard about writing a little paper on Ashokan pillars, the inscriptions on Ashokan pillars, and where they are found in the Arthashastra, because it all bases itself on the Arthashastra. For whatever stories you may have heard about Ashok only becoming Buddhist and doing everything according to Buddhist tenets, his inscriptions can all be found in the Arthashastra. So I'm thinking of doing a paper on this one. So then, where do I get the proper text, the original text of all these inscriptions? So I have to go back to those ASI reports, or I have to go to that place and take pictures. And read those inscriptions. The text of the Shastra, fine, it's now easily available, no problem. But the other side, to get authentic inscriptions of the Mauryan pillars, it'll require a kind of field trip. It'll require a field study. So that field study is a problem for me, a bit of a problem, because it's not easy for me to go always. But one manages. That's why, it takes decades and 15 years. That's why it takes so much time.
My God, isn't that fascinating to write a historical fiction book? You undertake this entire, kind of is a penance.
Even when I tweet, I don't tweet without checking primary sources. So anytime if you just read a tweet of mine and ask me a question about, okay, so where is the evidence from, where is the primary evidence, I'll give it all to you. Because I will read it first, reread it, and then I will post it. So that's a kind of special obsession of mine, I guess.
Thank God for that obsession that you have, that we have a book which is, informative as well as authentic, and we also get intrigued with it. May your tribe grow, Sumedha ji, and may you continue to give
Thank
us.
you. I'd love my tribe to grow. I would love to, chat with people who do the same thing.
Yes, no, you are rare, and I think this is something which is unique, actually, to be very honest.
So if somebody sends me a picture or somebody writes text, then I immediately parse it and see, okay, these things are not right because this is not right for the Mauryan period. This is what it was like. So perhaps I am a bit of an obsessive on that, but I want everything to be authentic and correct. I've told you, we have had discussions on when the Moralok that we are doing, what I speak, the illustrations that we do. We spend hours and hours and hours researching everything for authenticity. It's an obsession of mine, and I wish that obsession would be more common.
Absolutely. So one needs the persistence like you also to do that. And very few are gifted with that, Sumedha ji. I've dropped links in the chat box for everybody to Sumedha ji's latest book, Unnabhi, Chanakya Scribe, and also her channel, YouTube channel, Bharat Kirti, which has a beautiful series. Even in our last talk, the Mitra one, Sumedha ji brought along the researcher, another lady who's a bureaucrat also, and she explained the detail with which they make these series, and it's a visual delight to see on her YouTube channel. Please do click on the link.
The two are connected. If you watch all those episodes and you read Chanakya Scribe alongside, then your whole experience of the book will be at a totally different level. It will be in a different dimension. So I have not, here I have not told you the story of how Morelok was born, but it was born because when Urnabhi came out, then people kept on getting in touch with me. What does this mean? What does that mean? We don't understand this. We don't understand that. So then I was at that time, I started a page and I used to post something under the head of the world of Urnabhi. So I wrote things about, okay, the clothes, the food, the administration, politics, etc., etc. Then I wrote on similar lines a historical column in Swarajya on the same things. And then I realized that, people like watching videos, perhaps. It's an easier way of communicating. So then all this was put together and the world of Urnabhi became Morelok. And if you watch Morelok, it will add a lot to your Chanakya Scribe experience. And I've written that at the end of the book.
Please do purchase this book. We need to support wonderful authors like Sumedha ji, and we also need to support her channel.
Namaste, Sumedha ji.
Namaste.
So good to
Very
see
nice
you.
to see you again.
Yes, very good to see you too. Looking lovely as always. Very
Thank
nice.
you. Thank
So
you.
my question is about your protagonist, right? So you have said that it's great to know the work you do. First of all, thank you very much for the kind of dedication, and this is very rare. Like Tanya said, it's a very rare thing. So your protagonist is set in the Mauryan, and she is a Ganika, basically. And you're saying that she's caught in this whole sort of, like sort of a whatever phase that she's going through. She's pregnant, she's this and that. Now, I wanted to just find out, is that a bit of like a fictional imagination, or because one would imagine in these kind of empires, which were, because I remember in your first talk, you talked about all the systems and all the sort of processes they had in place for administration, for social organization, integration, so on. Would it not be that Ganikas, just like any other part of the administration, would be so loyal, to the empire, So there would be no question of any dilemma or any, मन में दुविधा कुछ है नहीं, बस ये करना है, that kind of thing. No? They would be like that it would be like a mission for them.
Yeah,
Or
so
not. Or do you think they would have the freedom to be, just that?
yeah, so that's very interesting because that's exactly what Mr. Casey also thinks. I am a Ganika and I know what I have to do. I have no doubts about it. But you see, what has happened is that she has sold out from being a Ganika, and I mean sold out literally. Because during modern times, a Ganika was a state employee. And if she wished to leave the life of a Ganika, she could pay a certain amount of money to the state, leave the life of a Ganika, and become a Grihast. So I don't know if you've read the first book, but at the end of the first book, this whole process is described about how this happens. And Mr. Casey, who was a spy, a Ganika, she knew exactly who she was, she knew exactly what she had to do. But you see, her place in the world has changed. She was a Mauryan employee, spy, Ganika. Now she is a grihast, a griha patni, a mother to be, also still an employee but not a spy. Now she is in the business of or in the area of writing down administrative orders for the entire kingdom. So the dilemma, the dissonance arises because her place in the world has changed and she has to define it. So at the beginning of this book, she is struggling with defining her new space, her new persona, her new personality. And that is what gives rise to a lot of competing thoughts. She is not used to the idea of being a mother. She is not used to the idea of being a wife. She had never thought she would do all this. The mission mode that you speak of, her mission mode was as a Ganika. She was trained, brought up, and absolutely certain that that's how she would live and die. But there has been this sudden change in her life. She has now become a grihast. And how should she behave as a grihast and an administration person in the Mauryan Empire? Whereas earlier she was a Ganika and a spy. She is no longer, okay, again, I don't want to give out any more spoilers. But a short answer to your question would be that the dissonance arises because her space has changed and her place has changed and she has to define it.
Namaste, Smriti.
Namaste.
Nice to see you after a long time.
Yes.
I read the book like halfway. I couldn't complete yet. Yeah, but there is a disclaimer in the end of the book. It says it should be like soon to be a major TV production. So this is valid or
Yes. So, we are working at it. And the film and TV industry is a very crazy one. So sometimes, like you are almost like signing the contract tomorrow and then no, some other change comes in. So I can definitely tell you that we are working on it and I hope to have some announcement. But before something concrete happens and the dotted line is signed, one cannot say anything.
yeah, I'm actually waiting for it. And I have question related to not related to the book, related to the Chanakya's Arthashastra. So, say if I want to start a Indic political party, so if this book, if I refer, is this is enough, or I need to go?
No, so
deeper?
then you see, if you want to know about the tradition of politics and how the state, the citizen is envisaged and what is the duty of the state towards the citizen, the best exposition is the most detailed exposition is found in the Arthashastra, but it's not a standalone document because the Arthashastra talks about, say, let's call it ancient Indian political science. The theory is very old. You will find it in the Mahabharata, in the Sabhapar. You will find it also in the Ramayana. You will also find it in so many other commentaries, both before as well as after Chanakya. So, just reading the Arthashastra will, of course, it will give you an excellent idea. And it's not an easy task. So, even if you manage to read the Arthashastra and understand it, wonderful, kudos to you, and you will be all set. But just don't forget that it's not standalone. There is a long tradition behind it, much of which is mentioned in the book itself, and there is a long tradition after it, which I feel still needs, little more of research and exposition. For example, if you read the Tirukural and see what parallels can be drawn with the Arthashastra, then there was someone called Kamandaki later in the 8th, 9th century who also wrote something on the Arthashastra commentary. And some people say that Kamandaki was a woman. So that's a very interesting thought. That was just an aside. My point is that don't treat the Arthashastra as a stand-alone manual. For your purposes, however, if you do read it and if you do understand it, it's a good beginning. It's a good base on which to stand, an excellent base on which to stand.
Thank you and very good evening to everybody here. Sumedha ji, in your opinion, what is the date of Chandragupta Maurya?
Now, that's a very excellent, very controversial, and very difficult question. The chronology of the Mauryans is not something on which the last word has been said. When I write these books, I start with the premise that it was around 321 BCE that Chandragupta was anointed as king. But I would be the first to admit that this whole story, this whole chronology of the Mauryans has many, many holes, as many holes as a sea. In fact, again, I have mentioned this on one of the talks, I think, because this is a common question. I have myself written a paper on the chronology of the Mauryans. And Tanya, I think, I wrote it for IGNCA. If I can get permission from them, I will share it with you and see if people want to read it. So the kind of evidence which has been shown to say that Sandrocotus of the Greeks was Chandragupta of the Mauryans, and that Ashok was the same as the Piyadasi found in Sri Lanka. There is a lot of evidence. You cannot say that it is kind of evidenceless. However, there are many, many holes in that evidence. Problem is that the whole work of demolishing that evidence has not been done properly. The paper I wrote also at the end stated that these are the things which we need to research, because there are issues of looking at inscriptions and understanding them, of looking at the lineages and chronologies of many different nations and seeing which king was there at which period. There are problems of translation. So if you translate something in a particular way, it points to a particular period. You translate something in a different way, it points to a different period. Then again, one of Ashok's inscriptions, a number of kings have been mentioned, of Egypt, of here, of there. So then there have been tried to be correlations, that if he's mentioning this king and this king ruled in Egypt at this time, so obviously then this must be the period. But then there are 2 or 3 kings of that name in the history of that nation. So which one was meant? So you see, things are not at all straightforward. If you ask me what was the date of the Mauryans, at this point of time, I don't think anybody is qualified to answer. And for me, when I started writing this, it was a very good question, and it was something that I wrestled with, because I am not convinced about this 321 BCE. But there is no other evidence properly gathered, collated, and accepted at the moment. And we had this 2-3 years ago. We had this huge conference at the IGNCA on this subject, where a number of people had come from, of different periods. There was somebody who was talking about the date of Gautam Buddha. The problem start from there. The problem start from the dating of Gautam Buddha according to the dotted record of the Chinese, because a lot of the Mauryan kings are again related to the date of Gautam Buddha. So, in sum, the problem of the chronology of ancient India is a big one. It needs to be attacked on an evidentiary basis. It needs to be attacked using many different kinds of evidence, not just text, but you have to corroborate those texts. Or like for example, some people use astronomical events which are mentioned in certain texts, but then that is also a matter of interpretation. So I don't know if all of you have heard of the very eminent history of ancient mathematics historian C.K. Raju. He was there at that chronology conference, and he was explaining to a lot of the younger people about how evidence works and how you cannot look at just one source. Anything that you get, you must corroborate it from all sides. Unfortunately, this kind of work has not been done. So merely to say that this is wrong takes us nowhere. We have to know where to go, what is right. That what is right has not been answered. Much research needs to be done. I hope it gets done in the correct way. Right now, I am not very optimistic. And I have no opinion to offer right now because I feel the evidence has not been collated and organized properly. And I don't like to talk without evidence. For people who are really interested, I will give references of a couple of books. I'll send it to you a little later to give the specific reference. They have written very well on this subject. So maybe people can try and read those books also.
Also, Sumedha ji is there on Twitter, so she's at SV Ojha. That's her Twitter handle, at SV Ojha. Please do follow her, and she's very active there, and she would definitely let everybody know when the paper is published.
And
The-
even on Twitter, you can ask me any question that you want to ask anytime.
Yes, so please do visit her Twitter profile and follow her, and you won't be disappointed. Definitely not.
Namaste, Sumedha ji. Can you hear me?
Namaste. Very nice to see you,
Good to
Arvind.
see you too.
Wonderful to see you.
So, apart from the primary historical sources, were there influences of previous attempts at fiction as well, starting from, say, the Mudra Rakshasa, or even more recent attempts to portray the historical period like Chandra Prakash Dwivedi ji's teleseries or Manoj Joshi's play on Chanakya? So, even if only to avoid missteps based on the resources available at the time, were those influences or resources you consulted in any way?
So, Arvind ji, I like to think of the Urnabi series as a sequel to Mudra Rakshas. Book 1 begins exactly where Mudra Rakshas leaves off. And I was talking about literary antecedents. So there are so many of the characters of Mudra Rakshas. I don't know if you've read it, you'll recognize them. Siddhartha, Kensu Siddhartha, and the dancing girl who is killed in the middle of the story. So I think I have continued the story of the Mudra Rakshas. And Sukeshi is the dancing girl who dies in Mudra Rakshas. I've just given her a name and a sister and hung the story on that sister. So Siddharthak of that book is Siddharthak of my book also. If you remember, Siddharthak was a spy in Mudra Rakshas, if you've read it. So Siddharthak of Mudra Rakshas and Siddharthak of the Urnabi series are the same. I have even, I have tried to portray even the character this in the same way as Vishak did. So lots of books, lots of people from that, small characters, big characters. In fact, even Pushyamitra is based on a combination of Siddhartha and Susiddhartha. Although, of course, then, I had another idea about Pushyamitra and I connected him to the Sungas as an ancestor of that Pushyamitra Sunga who will overthrow the Mauryans for certain reasons, which will be clear as the story progresses. Mudra Rakshas was, it was what was at the back of my mind when I was writing the Urnabi series. And I'm so glad you asked that. Of course, you will, because you are a very learned person and you know all these things. Normally, nobody asks me. I have to tell them that, look, there is this play, Mudra Rakshas, and I think that I'm writing a sequel to that. As far as Chandra Prakash Dwivedi is concerned, I am a great admirer of Chandraprakash Trivedi and a great admirer of the series that he made. His research is tremendous. His research is admirable. If there is, anybody whose research I can actually look at, and whenever I check it, even this, say, the speech that is given by Alexander, or in that serial, or some of the things which are spoken by some of the characters, if you go back and research primary sources, you will find them there. So Chandra Prakash Dwivedi is an amazing researcher. And yes, I did watch that series before I wrote my own book. I did watch that series. I watched that series very often. I think it's a beautifully made series and very, very authentically done. My only wish is that, the production values had been a little better. The production values are quite poor. But the authenticity of that series is pretty good. I'm not fully happy with the clothes. I don't think they really got the clothes absolutely right. And some of the settings and the buildings and the architecture, maybe not. So, like, not 100%, but it's a very authentic series. And the context, events, dialogues, they are very authentic and very beautifully researched. You asked me about something else. Was these were the two things, and was there one more thing?
There was also play on Chanakya by Manoj.
No, that I don't like it very much. I mean, I've read it, but that I don't like too much. It's because then there are actually so many other. Jaishankar Prasad also wrote Chandragupta.
Yes.
And a lot of other people have also written about, and I think Acharya Chatur Sen and also K. Munshi hasn't. K. Munshi has also written a book on the Mauryan period. So sometimes I find that my idea of the authenticity of that period does not always sync with the other people who have written it. Because I find, like I said, I'm obsessive about these things. So I find some false note somewhere and then, I don't like it. But the Mudra Rakshas, definitely. Mudra Rakshas is book 0 of the Urnabi series.
Looking forward to read the books before the teleseries comes out.
Please do. If you haven't, please do read the books and read book 1 and then read book 2.
Are you conducting any course on the Arthashastra? It would be helpful if she transfers her immense knowledge to people who want to know from the authentic sources.
So I have conducted one course, and I do conduct, kind of like mini workshops, 2-day, 3-day mini workshops. So in case I conduct any others, I will be in touch about, I will be in touch via Sangam Talks itself.
Yes,
but I want to say something over here. And what I want to say is, reading historical fiction is maybe for fun, but it is also something to just get you in touch with your past. And why are there not more people writing historical fiction, our own stories of the people who have gone before us? I grew up reading an author called Jean Plaidy. So I could reel off to you the names of each and every king and queen of England for the past 1,000 years, 1,500 years, because I read those books. She wrote about everyone, she wrote about all their reigns, and she was not the only one. There are so many people who write about their own country's past. And when you read those, you learn about it in a very easy and automatic way. That has not happened in our country. And I really don't know the reason why. When I first went with this book to a publisher with the idea of this book, I was laughed off. And the publisher said, listen, nobody wants to read about Chandragupta Maurya. You live in Switzerland, you write something about NRIs, we'll publish it. I did not want to write about NRIs. I wanted to write about our past, and I want everyone to know about our past. I don't understand why people do not write more, read more. Why do we not know our own history very well through easy to read, entertaining books? All of you as readers, please make your preferences known to publishers and to those who write books, that you want books on these subjects.
I actually had an observation to the point you made, ma'am. But why don't we write more? Now, I think from all these years and all the controversies that have been going on and all the readings that we've been doing, one of the things that's come out is actually that we, especially Hindus, we are oral people. It's all come down orally, so we really don't have any interest, we don't pay any importance to scribing things. In fact, I even read a few years ago that Bhagavad Gita was actually transcribed and put into it because of the British, because they love doing these. They just love scribing and keeping everything, that's just what the English love doing. Otherwise, we don't, because it just passes from generation to generation by law. It's a very big problem. I totally agree with you. That's a huge, huge lapse. Even in terms of history, in terms of everything, we don't have. Whereas even contemporary history also, I mean, even what you talk about historical fiction, I mean, I'd like to sort of draw the attention of everyone here, and also Sumita, you might have read Khalid Hosseini. Khalid Hosseini, when I read years ago when he wrote his book. So he's a very good writer. And the thing, what you get is you get a real glimpse of life of how it was in Afghanistan and how it still is now with the Taliban back. He has really done it very well, especially going and describing the whole female perspective, which he talked about again because he had so many sisters. I think he was the only brother, so he could actually see through that, and it's a great way to actually know what's happening. But historical fiction, at least writers like you, and you're perhaps the only one who's doing it as well. Amish Tripathi, to a certain extent, going way back, which is also interesting. But contemporary, also nobody wants to write about anything. We have so many issues, and yet we don't have to.
No, but Deepanjali, there's no dearth of books being published. There's so many books being published all the time, self-publishing, publishers, books, and more books and more books. But what are the topics people choose? These topics are very far away from any kind of either contemporary history or the past. So it's not as if people are not writing at all. I do get your point about oral civilization, and I think you have a good point there. Perhaps because we do disseminate things in tradition, in traditional ways, but remember those traditional ways have broken down. What exists today is YouTube videos in the name of oral tradition, and many of those YouTube videos are nothing but nonsense. So many of those traditions have broken down and new ones have not come in their place. But the choice of topics also, I mean, what do people write about today? It's all about some kind of modern societal angst. The more angst you show, the better it is, and the more awards you get. So I personally find it difficult to read such books, but they are popular. And writing about history is not popular. Is it because you don't want to read? I mean, as readers, you can tell me. Is it that people don't want to read history?
Yes. That's what it is.
Then, of course, there's no solution.
Because I think even from our school days, most teachers, very few history teachers actually instill a love of history in their students. So most of us don't do. Like some of us are great. We enjoy our history. We want to know more. But as such, the larger mass of a classroom, they're not really bothered. Even history or geography or any of these subjects are actually very interesting. Are just thought of as very routine, and the focus is always on engineering, karna, medicine, that sort of thing.
Well, yes.
So no one's interested. No one's interested in our past.
So it's an uphill fight for people like me. Very uphill fight.
Totally.
But we'll do it.
All the best.
Yes, we'll do it with the support of readers.
Totally.
Yes, so Deepanjali ji was saying she'll buy the book, and I request, as a third person, Prasangam Talks, please buy Sumedha ji's books. Please read her articles, share it, and support people like her. We need people like her. And I drop links with the book to purchase on the chat, and also her YouTube channel. Please subscribe. As Sumedha ji said, that we need to let the publishers know that this is what we like. So it's a fight from our end also. Alone she won't be able to do it. So thank you so much, Sumedha ji. We'll have you back. Thank you,
Tanya. Thank you, Shruti. Thanks to everyone who was here. And do get back to me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and give me your thoughts on the book. Any questions? I would love all of them. I would love to give you a background to whatever has been written in the book, how I wrote it, and lots of extra stuff. So get in touch.